Creating these classes requires equipment and services that cost money. If you appreciate this education, please think about going to elithecomputerguy.com and offering a one-time or monthly recurring donation. Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli the Computer Guy, and in today's class, we're going to be talking about stored functions within MySQL database servers. So what stored functions allow you to do is they essentially allow you to manipulate data within your tables, within your MySQL databases. So the example that I'm going to be showing you today is, let's imagine we're trying to figure out what the retail price for our inventory items should be. So we have a parts table that I've created a number of classes ago, and within that parts table we have a number of different records for parts, and then we have the price for those parts. Now let's imagine the price for those parts is the price that we paid for those parts, and so we want to figure out how much the parts should be if we are going to be selling them to our customers. I'm going to say in this event that we're just simply putting a 25% markup on all the parts. So if we purchased it for $10, then we will sell it for $12.50. If we purchased it for $1, we'll sell it for $1.25. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a stored function that will go through and it will do the math based off of that 25% markup. So we'll actually be able to go through, basically do something along the lines of a select all statement, and then what will happen is we'll see our price. So we'll see the original price on one side, and then we'll see what the new retail price should be on the other. So when we're talking about functions, this is the type of thing that we're looking at with functions, is a lot of times this is going to be mathematical manipulation of data within your tables to provide you some type of results. So again, trying to figure out, let's say, sale items. So let's say you have the prices for your inventory, what it normally is, and now you want to do a 10% off sale for the day or for the week or whatever. You can just input that 10% off within a stored function, and then it will give you the price that you should be charging your customers. Now, I will say, when you start getting into stored functions, like many things, like you've probably heard this before, like many things in the MySQL world, wow, you can go really deep on this stuff. You can go into a rabbit hole as far as stored functions are concerned. One of the problems that I run into as somebody trying to teach you about things like stored functions is how to teach you enough so you get the idea of what's going on without trying to teach you so much that, again, you give up and go be a florist. So if you like what you're seeing here and you want to learn more about stored functions, we will do more classes about this in the future, but obviously, as with everything in here, go do a Google search, take a look at what stored functions will offer you, because stored functions, if you need them, like if your particular environment needs stored functions can be absolutely amazing. They can provide you a lot of solutions to the problems that you're having, but it's one of those things. It gets very mathy very quick. I know a lot of this, that's one of the things, like with IT people, a lot of IT people out there surprisingly don't like math. It's not that they don't like math, they're really bad at math. And so one of the problems you can get into with stored functions is basically, this is math, or it's basically like a lot of equation-y type stuff. And so one of the problems you can get into is when you're trying to do very complex functions, if you're not used to math, and if you're not really sure what you're trying to accomplish, you can get to the point of getting frustrated very quickly, and like I say, giving up. So I'm going to show you a very basic example today, just to give you an idea of how these stored functions work. If you need to know more about it, please go out there and do some more research. The rabbit hole to this goes really, really, really deep. There's a lot of interesting things that you can do, but to be clear, we're just glossing over the very top of this particular set of information, just so that you don't get too confused when you're trying to learn about it. Warning, Will Robinson, warning. Should probably come up with another phrase to say. Who knows? With all the copyright infringement rules and laws out there, I'd hate to get hit by saying the warning, Will Robinson. Is that trademarked? I don't know. But anyways, there is a bit of a warning, Will Robinson, with this particular class. Something that a lot of new people, or people that might not be used to programming in databases, may get confused about is, remember, whenever you're dealing with databases and whenever you're dealing with programming in general, there is permanent data and impermanent. So there's permanency and impermanent. Why that's important with what we're dealing with today is what we're going to be doing is we are going to be creating impermanent values. So when we come up with the retail price that I'll be showing you in these tables. So again, we're going to have a parts table. Within that parts table, we have the prices that we paid for the item, and then we're going to do a stored function to tell us what we should be selling those items for. So when you're looking at the table, it'll say like the part ID, the part name, the part price, the vendor ID, and then at the end, it'll say what the retail price should be. The important thing to understand here is that retail price at the end, when you're looking at that view, that is impermanent data. That is not actually at this time being stored. And a lot of people can get confused about this. So the data that's permanent with what we're dealing with today is the data that's in the table. So the part ID number is permanent. It is there. If we shut off the server and turn the server back on, that data is there. The part name is permanent. It's there. The part price, the price that we're paying is there, and the vendor ID, we're not worried about that today, but that is there. That is all data that is permanent, and you can actually work against it in the normal flow of a SQL statement. So you can go select whatever part name, where part price is over such and such, right? So with permanent data within the database, you can actually interact with that data relatively easily. The retail price that we're creating today, when we're doing this function, we're creating what's called impermanent data. Basically, that data only exists when you call the function, right? So we have the table, and the table is there, right? And then we're going to create a function to create the retail price. Well, the table as it was before and the table after we leave the function are the same. We're not actually modifying that table at all. We're not actually inserting any data into the table. We're not doing an update operation on the table. We're kind of like scribbling, like think of it mentally as if we're like scribbling notes on the side. And so that's just something to think about whenever you're looking at things like views and you're thinking and you're working with these tables, is think about what data is permanent and what data is impermanent, because as you're going to be building out your database for whatever project that you're going to be doing, if you do things like create functions and then you do not save the data that's created by those functions into a table, basically output them in some way, then it will be very hard for you to be able to interact with those values going on to the future. At this point, you may be so new that may be a little bit confusing. This might be one of those lessons where like 5 classes from now you go, oh, that's what Eli is talking about. But the warning here is that when we're doing these stored functions today, we are creating impermanent data. More or less, you will not be able to do additional calculations or work based upon the data that we've created. And as soon as you leave the function, that data disappears. If you don't quite grasp what I'm talking about, don't worry, it's okay. Probably in the future, it'll start to make a little bit more sense. But that is just the warning here, is just because that's one thing. Like when you're looking at a view, when you look at a view of something like a table, again, a select all, it's very easy to get confused between the view and the table itself. So if you do this function and you get the retail price, it's very easy to think, oh, that retail price is now inside the table. And it's not inside the table. It's in the view, it's not in the table. And I should probably stop now before you get even more confused. So with that, let's go over to the computer and I can show you how these stored functions work. Okay, so here we are at my computer again. Again, I have a MacBook Pro. I am running VirtualBox. Within an instance on VirtualBox, I'm running Ubuntu Desktop 18.04 LTS. And then I used something called TaskCell to install the entire LAMP stack onto this Linux desktop. So I have Apache, MySQL, and PHP. So more or less, that's how you get to the lab environment that you're dealing with here. We're going to go down here. You go up to search, obviously. We type in terminal to get to terminal, and now we have our terminal. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log in. So again, MySQL -u, our username is Bob-P for the password. Hit enter. Password is 123456. And yay, now we are in MySQL. From that, I will hit Control-L to clear the screen to make this a little bit easier to see. Now again, to always make sure we know what's going on with our database server, we do type show databases, semicolon. This shows us the databases that we're dealing with on the server. So we want to use the class DB. So we're going to use class DB, semicolon, delimiter. Again, when you're dealing with stored procedures and stored functions, the delimiter becomes a very important concept. So again, currently we're using a semicolon as a delimiter. Then we're going to go in. So we're in the class DB. Now we're going to do show tables, just so we know what we're dealing with the tables. So we have the tables, we have parts and we have vendors. We do describe parts. So describe, DESC, will describe the information, basically the schema of the parts table. Again, semicolon. So we can see we have a field, we have a part ID number. So this is just kind of like the ID number for parts. It is an auto increment, so every part has its own number, and it is a primary key. We don't really worry about that. That's just used more for, again, the back end stuff to make sure the database doesn't screw anything up. Then we have a part hyphen or a part underscore name. That is a text type. Then we have part underscore price. That's what we're going to be dealing with today. That is a float. So the data type is going to be important here. And then we have the vendor underscore ID that we're not going to be worried about at all today, and that is going to be an integer. Then just to see what's going on with this particular table, we'll do select all from parts. So this will select all columns, all records from parts table. And so as we can see here, we have a cog, we have a rod, we have a sprocket, a nut, a washer, and a flange, and we've got prices. $11.50, $2.50, $8.50, so on and so forth. So this is one of the important things, right? If you're going to be creating something like a stored function, make sure that your table exists. Make sure your table, the schema for your table, looks how it's supposed to look, and then make sure there's actually some records within the table. You know, a lot of people go out there and they'll create a function to an empty table, or they'll create a function and they'll screw everything up because they don't know what data types or whatever their table allows for. So the big one that we're going to be looking at though today is part underscore price, and the data type for that is float. And we can see again $11.50, $2.50, $8.50. So again, when you're talking about an integer is a data type that is a whole number. 1, 10, 220, that is an integer. A float is basically with a decimal point, 11.5, 2.5, 6.25, 2.1, that is a float. There's also decimal data types and all kinds of other data types, but we just use float today, and all I need to know is that it is a float. So with that, let me Control L, clear the screen again. And so now the first thing that we need to do is we need to set the delimiter, just like we did in the stored procedures class. So we do is delimiter, and then we're going to do $$. You could put this theoretically to whatever delimiter you want it to be. And so what this means is that MySQL will not try to process what we type in until it sees $$, and then I hit enter. When I create the function that I'm about to show you, there's going to be a number of different semicolons in there. If we did not modify the delimiter at this point in time, as soon as I typed in semicolon, then I hit enter, it would try to process the half-aborted crap that I had just written before I could actually complete everything, right? So you really need to modify this delimiter. This is one of those things, I agree with you. It is stupid. It is idiotic. It is all the bad words I probably can't say anymore. But it's true. Just because it's stupid doesn't mean it's not true, right? So yes, you need to modify the delimiter, whatever the hell you want it to be. $$ is just easy, and it's on a lot of the examples. So we're modifying the delimiter to $$. From this, we're then going to create our function. So we're going to create a function called retailCalc. And so we're going to do create function, just like we create a lot of things. Then we say what the name is, retailCalc. So this can be whatever name you want it to be. So we are going to be calling this function when we're doing our normal statements based off of whatever we call it. So I'm calling this retailCalc. You can name this whatever you want. Then we're going to open parentheses. At this point, we are then going to say what variables and what data types of the variables we are going to be giving to this particular function. So the first thing that we're going to do is part underscore price. So part underscore price, that's going to be coming from the part price column within the parts table. And I'm going to say that this is a float. So part price is the name and the data type is a float. Then I'm going to do comma. The next variable that we're going to be dealing with is the markup. And that will also be a float. And then for this, I'm only giving it 2 variables, so I will close the parentheses. Now, it is important that your data types are correct. Again, if you have an int in your table, you may not want to say that it's a float here. If you have a float in the table, you probably don't want to say it's an int here. So you do have to make sure that the data types correspond with what you want them to be. Past that, we are then going to say returns. So what data type is this function going to return? And so it's also going to return a float. So this is important here. So when we return a float, that's going to be a number with a decimal point. So if you returned an integer, an int, that would not have a decimal point. So you could do all this math, and then it would literally strip off anything past the decimal point. So if it was supposed to be, if the final price is supposed to be $11.50, it would simply give you $11. If it was supposed to be $2.25, it would simply give you $2, right? That's an important thing to be thinking about with the data type. Again, with the float here, I'm actually doing a float just because it's the easiest. Again, to be clear, when I teach you things, I try to make it as easy as possible. We're actually going to see a problem by using the data type float once we get done with this and we actually run this particular function, because it's actually going to give us too many numbers past the decimal place. So it'll be like $12.37.5. So that's the kind of thing that you need to be thinking about, like with the data, with the end result that you're going to be giving to your end user. One, is it correct? So again, if you're stripping off the final decimal points, that's bad because that's simply incorrect. Or two, is it usable? If you're giving your end user too many numbers at the end, that can run into problems. But I'll show you that at the end. The main thing here is that you're just simply saying what kind of data are you going to be returning. So for us, to be easiest, we're just going to be doing a float. Then we're going to hit enter, and then just like with a stored procedure, we're going to hit begin. So this now begins the function, and the first thing that we need to do is we need to declare a variable within this function. So basically what we are going to be returning. So when we multiply the part price by the markup, that will be the retail price that we'll be returning. So we're going to declare retail price, and that again is going to be a float data type. Then we're going to do semicolon. Now, because we modified the delimiter up here, we should not run into any problems. Hit enter, yay! I want you to understand, if I had not modified the delimiter, when I did that semicolon, then I hit enter, literally MySQL would try to process that half. And then it just gets ugly. And the worst part is it doesn't always necessarily completely fail out. Sometimes it does part of it, which is even worse. So yeah, just do the delimiter. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to set the value of the variable retail price. So retail price. So we're going to set the value of the variable retail price is going to equal, and it's going to equal part, the value of part underscore price times markup. And so basically, this is the math that you're going to be running. And so this math can be very simple or it can be very easy. And whatever the equation is the equation that you put in there. So what I'm going to be doing is for this markup, I'm simply going to be doing like 1.25. So we're going to increase the price of the part by 25%. So I'm going to multiply the part price by 1.25, and that should give me the additional 25% price as the final retail price. How you come up with that math is basically completely up to you. So this part right here, this is whatever wacky ass math you decide to put in there. And just realize again, you can have something that functions but is also incorrect at the same time. A lot of new people get that confused when they're doing this kind of math. Like you can put in whatever math you want to put in whatever equation you want right here. It doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the right answer or the answer that you need out of that equation. So whenever you're doing any kind of math stuff, always get somebody to check what you're doing, or at least go back and make sure the math, the results that you're getting is what they're supposed to be, because that's what happens with a lot of new coders is they code everything right. It runs perfectly. The problem that they run into, though, is they screw up this math, and so the values that are being returned are incorrect. The computer's computing the values fine, but the value itself is wrong because the equation is wrong. So anyways, we do the semicolon there, and then we hit enter to go down to the next line, and then we're going to return retail price. So we're going to return the value of the variable retail price, and we're going to do semicolon again, and then we're going to say end. And then we're going to do $$ because we are now completely finished with this. So we created a function called retailCalc. We're putting in two variables, a part_price, which is a float, a markup, which is a float. It is going to return a float. We began the function by declaring a variable called retailPrice. That is also a float. We are going to set the value of retailPrice to be equal to part_price times markup. We are then going to return the value of retailPrice. And as long as I didn't do something stupid, I should hit enter, and it should all be okay. Yay, query okay, 0 rows. You don't know, every time I type in one of these things, I'm always so happy when I didn't screw anything up. You folks don't see it, but in order to do these classes, I did a lab like 10 times beforehand. Oh, you don't know how many times I forget a comma or a semicolon or... Oh, it's just a pain. Anyways, now the next thing that we need to do, the very next thing that we need to do, as soon as we get this okay, the next thing that we need to do is we need to set the delimiter back to being a semicolon. Because if you don't do that, you can run into major problems. So don't get me wrong, like if you're doing more, if you're creating more stored procedures or more stored functions, obviously don't reset the delimiter. But if you're doing anything else other than those two things, reset the delimiter back to the semicolon. And now from here, what we're going to do is we are actually going to run this new function. So I'm going to hit Control L to clear the screen. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to say select all. So we're going to select all columns from the table, but then we're also going to be adding in this function. So we put comma, so comma to add in the function, and we're going to say retailCalc. So this is the name of the function that we're going to be calling. And then we're going to give it the variables that we're going to be dealing with. So part_price. So this corresponds to the column name within the parts table. Then we're going to do comma. And then as far as markup is concerned, we are then going to do 1.25. So essentially, as far as that function was, we're going to multiply part price by 1.25. And so that should give us our 25% markup. And then we're going to close the parentheses. So we're going to be calling the retailCalc function. We're going to be giving these two variables. And then based off of that function that we created, this will then be calculated. And then we want to return, basically actually present the results as retail. So what's going to happen is when we look at the table, at the end of the table, there's going to be a new, what appears to be a column. It's a view column. But remember, this data is not stored within the table itself. But there's a column that you can now view that will be called retail with these numbers at the end. And then we're going to say from the parts table. So select all. So select all columns, comma. We're going to call the function. Oops, we're going to call the function a retailCalc. We are going to then put in part price. It's going to be times 1.25. We are then going to return that as retail from parts. And then we're going to hit semicolon and we're going to hit enter. Yay! So now we have what looks like the old table, but at the end is the retail price. So this is the retail price that we should be charging our customers. Though again, since I just used the basic float, you can now see where you can run into problems with data types, especially when you start doing these types of calculations. Because if I have a customer come in and they say, how much is the COG? I want to buy a COG, and I tell them $14.37.5. That's not actually useful. It is, to be clear, it is correct. It's not useful. And so this is one of those things you need to be thinking about with the data types, and that's why sometimes you use an integer, sometimes you use a float, sometimes you use a decimal. So with a decimal, you can actually state how many places for the decimal point it should go. So that might be a more useful data type here. I'm just using floats, again, to make it easier for you to see how all of this works. And that's basically all there is to the function. Now again, if I do select all from parts, so it's the parts table, and I hit enter, semicolon, and then enter. So what you can see here is, as I was saying before, is that this retail value here, this is not permanent, right? This is not actually part of the parts table. We only view that when we're using the function within the SQL statement. As soon as I go back to simply doing select all from parts, we can see that it disappears. Again, this will become more important as you create more complicated databases. And so if you need to be able to calculate and then output those calculations into the table so that it actually gets saved, that's something that you'll have to be dealing with in the future. Now, past that, one of the things we can make life a lot easier is we can then create a stored procedure based off of this SQL statement with a function, right? So, okay, so this makes our life easier because we can now see the retail price relatively easy. But what if I want to make it even easier still and simply be able to call a stored procedure and to have the SQL statement run to give me the results so that I don't even have to type in all of this crap all the time. So to do that, again, we can do a stored procedure like we did before. So I do delimiter, $, then we like to do Control L to clear the screen. And so now we can do a create procedure. So we can do create procedure, right? And then what we're going to create the procedure, we're going to call it price, let's say list, open parentheses, close parentheses. So this all comes from the stored procedure class that we did before. We're going to hit enter, then we're going to hit begin. We're going to hit enter again, and then we're going to type in the SQL statement that we just had. So select all, comma, and then we're going to say retail calc, and then open parentheses, and then we're going to do part underscore price like we did before, comma, and then 1.25. So we're going to be multiplying part price by, close parentheses. And then we're going to say as retail from parts, right? So this is the basic SQL statement, select all, comma, retailCalc function, part price, blah, blah, blah. Then we're going to hit enter. Then we're going to do from here, we're simply going to say end, $. There we go, everything's okay. The next thing that I do is set the delimiter back to semicolon. And now what I can do is, since I created this price list stored procedure, now instead of typing all that crap out, what I can do is I can simply do call price list semicolon, and now I get the values here just like I wanted. So again, so this is one of those things that can be very useful for you, is you can create functions that will then go through and will manipulate data within your tables, and then you can create a stored procedure based off of that stored function, and then you can go from there. So like with this 1.25, I could modify this in the future. So I could delete the procedure price list and then recreate it and have this value be 1.10, or I could have it be 1.50, or have it 1.55. And then as far as my users are concerned, all they have to type in is call price list, and then they will simply get the results. So this is how you can take those stored functions. You then use those stored functions within a stored procedure, and then you can make life a lot easier for your end users. Simply do call price list. And again, for a lot of the new kids out there, for a lot of the new kids out here, this looks ugly as hell. But to be clear, when I started in the professional world back in the early 90s, this is what computers looked like. This is how we interacted with computers back in the old days. Anyways, let me clear the screen again. And now we can do, one of the things that we need to look at is to see what functions we have for this particular database. So in order to see what functions we have for this particular database, we can do the show function. So what we're going to do, or the show function status, looks a lot like the stored procedure, where db equals single quotation mark, class db, close single quotation mark, and then we're going to do the semicolon again. So this is going to say show function status where the database equals class db. We're going to hit enter, and so it spits out some information, and down here we can see the retailCalc. So we have a retailCalc function that was created by Bob. It was created at this time, it was modified at this time, so on and so forth. So the show function status where db equals tables, whatever your database is, that will show you all the stored functions that you have. But again, just like with stored procedures, great, you know what the hell the name of it is, but that doesn't actually tell you what it does. So the next thing that you need to do is you need to type in the show create function to show how that function was created. But again, this is one of the important things too to be thinking about with like naming conventions, is the more the names for things like functions and procedures just make sense, the easier it will be to maintain your database and especially hand off your database when you get promoted or you go to the next job. So again, retailCalc, if I look at retailCalc, I have an idea that's probably calculating the retail price. Oh, I know there's a function that calculates the retail price, and that's called retailCalc. So I bet you that's the function. Where, again, with the stored procedures, I just called it nasty. And I have no idea what the hell nasty means, right? So again, you need to be thinking about names. When you're doing this, there is what is technically correct, and then there's human readable. Think about making things human readable. So anyways, we need to see what the retailCalc actually does. So we're going to do show create function retailCalc. So this basically says, show me how the function retailCalc was created. Then we're going to do a semicolon. I think I typed all that correctly. We are going to hit enter, and then it's going to give us a whole bunch of information that we don't care about. Basically, what we're going to be looking for is the begin. So the begin and the end, everything in between, that is what our function actually is. So we're going to see it declares a retail price. That's a float. It sets the value of retail price to be equal to part underscore price times markup. It's going to return the retail price. So again, if you're having problems with the math for some reason, if you're trying to figure out why the numbers aren't coming up to what you think the number should be, basically you just show how the function was created, and you might find, again, this part right here, this is going to be the big hang up. You can put in an equation that the computer processes that gives you garbage out. So just to be clear there. Then finally, doing Control L. In order to get rid of a function, all you have to do is drop, and then you're going to say function. So whenever you're deleting something, drop table, drop database, drop whatever. So we're going to drop the function, and that function is going to be retailCalc. And then we're going to do semicolon, drop the function, and now the function is gone. And so that's how you can create a function. That's how you can use a function within the stored procedures, as I showed you before. That's how you can then see what stored functions are on the database that you're using. You can see how the function was created, and you can see how to delete the function. And that's really the basics of stored functions for you. And so now at least you have a basic idea of stored functions within MySQL database servers. At the end of the day, like most of this stuff, it's relatively easy. The problem that you're going to get into here is understanding how to technically make functions work is relatively easy, right? Create function, blah, 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 begin, end, blah, 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 right? All that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. The problem that you're going to run into is creating those equations. It is hilarious. It's weird. Like, people that are not in technology think that everybody that's in technology are like math whizzes. It is shocking how bad so many IT professionals are at very basic math. Very basic math. They can do Active Directory. They can do Active Directory. They can do backup schemes. They can be amazing with technology and just be horrible with math at the exact same time. And so the problem that you're going to run into with these stored functions is, again, you can have a function that processes perfectly and gives you a garbage answer. And that's something that you really do have to be careful about. Again, especially as you start building out your database system, because what's going to happen is in the beginning, you have a couple of tables. You're going to compute things based off of those couple of tables. And maybe in the beginning, if you're a little bit off, if it's a little bit wonky, you're a little bit off, it won't really matter. As far as the business is concerned, it won't really matter. But then if you start tying those results into other functions, and those are also a little bit off, and then those results are tied into other functions, all of a sudden you can go from being like 1% off, where the business isn't even going to notice that there's a problem, to be massively off. And especially if you have to have things like corporate auditors come in. I mean, the last thing in the world you want to find out is that you've been over or under billing, all of your customers by like half a cent. Because you're just like, how do I even deal with that? How do I either A, refund it, or B, bring it into our normal accounting system? That can just be like absolutely horrible. So be very careful with the math. If you're going to be using these functions in a production environment, again, for things like a point of sale system, any kind of invoicing system, anything like that, have somebody else verify your math, right? When you're going to write the equation, put it in front of somebody else and goes, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Does that equation make sense to you? And if they say no, go back to the drawing board. Again, it's very important to understand. You can have a function run perfectly and give absolutely garbage results at the same time. So be very careful with that. Beyond that, also do remember, like in the database world, is when we start doing things like functions and we're looking at a view, remember that retail column that we created is impermanent, right? It is only there when we call the function. When you go back and you do a normal select all for the parts table, it disappears because it's not permanent. It doesn't permanently reside within the database. Again, this can be important as you start building out your database. You may want to actually be able to interact with those results, and in that case, then you're going to want to make sure that you actually update the records in the table with those results. We may or may not talk about that in the future, but if you need to do that, just go and do some research on it. It's pretty easy to figure out. But those are some of the things to be kind of thinking about when you start dealing with these functions. And so it can be very valuable. Again, if you think about like markups for price, if you think about sales, if you think about other ways that you can compute things, this can be a very useful tool for you and something that gets overlooked by a lot of people that are new to MySQL databases. So as always, I enjoyed doing this video and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Apparently, the type of content you just saw is not what Susan W. wants for the future of YouTube. This means that recommendations by YouTube to this channel have dropped massively and views are becoming comically small. I hate to ask. I used to say I would never ask, but if you could subscribe, like, comment, and most importantly, share the videos that you appreciate, that may help slow the death of this channel. Do remember that if anything at all happens to this channel, you can go to EliTheComputerGuy.com to view the content and access information not available on YouTube.